Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little dangerous, mentally dangerous. Because we are quietly stepping off a creaking wooden ship and into Colonial America, where the streets are not paved with gold. Opportunity smells a lot like sewage. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not even a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And also comment your location and your local time. It's always satisfying to see from where are you tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your shoes slap onto wooden planks, slick with the residue of too many voyages and too little cleaning. You thought your first breath of New World air would smell like pine and potential. Instead, it hits your lungs like a damp cloth, soaked in salt, smoke, wet rope, and something vaguely resembling dead fish, but might be worse if you followed the smell to its source. The harbour is swarming, not bustling, not busy swarming. Men hauling crates, women carrying buckets, children darting between horses, goats chewing on rope like it's lunch, and a pig that seems suspiciously determined to run the whole town. Someone yells at you, you're not sure who, or why, or what they said, because the accent is thick enough to spread on toast. But the tone tells you it wasn't friendly. You imagined hopeful colonists waving banners, greeting newcomers with smiles and maybe a baked pie, if the moment felt particularly cinematic. Instead, nobody looks at you twice. You're just another problem that washed in with the tide. And the very first historical fact hits you right now. More than half the earliest Europeans who arrived in some colonies didn't survive their first year. Disease, starvation, and exposure greeted newcomers faster than opportunity. A man bumps your shoulder hard enough to shift your entire skeleton. He doesn't apologize because apologizing isn't a cultural reflex yet. It's more of an optional accessory. You hear coughing heavy, wet coughing from somewhere behind you, followed by someone hawking something onto the planks that lands with a sound you never want to hear again. You clutch your small travel bundle. Inside, clothing that won't be warm enough, food that won't last long enough, and coins that won't buy enough. A gull screams overhead, but honestly it might have been you. This place is not the poster you saw in your imagination. Historians still argue whether recruiting pamphlets intentionally exaggerated prosperity or whether desperate settlers exaggerated their success because admitting failure across an ocean was worse than dying quietly here. But either way, the brochure never mentioned the smell. A horse cart rumbles past, wheels grinding through mud. Except, wait, that's not mud. That glossy, dark, sludgy trail streaking across the lane? That's waste. Human, animal, mixed, fermented by the Sunday. Colonial sanitation is basically just wishful thinking. Fun fringe fact. Some colonies believed hanging fish skeletons in your home purified the air. It didn't. It just added another flavor to the scent profile. You step forward anyway, because what else are you going to do reboard the ship? The captain already shouted his instructions. Unload fast, leave faster. This harbour isn't exactly a parking lot. Ships arrive like guests, and must leave like they're being chased by creditors, which they often are. A woman wearing a linen cap approaches you. She asks where you're headed. The real answer is, anywhere better. But you don't say that because sarcasm hasn't been invented yet. Well, technically it has, but nobody would laugh. She informs you that lodging exists, though lodging is a strong word. You nod like you know what she means, and follow a dirt path that used to be a road in theory, but in practice is just dirt. Every building looks tired, more assembled than constructed, like a group project where half the team gave up and the other half lied about how good they are with hammers. The wind whistles through gaps in the timber like the houses themselves are sighing. You look back at the harbour one last time, because it represents everything familiar. Home, safety, the exit. But the ship is already pushing off. Too many mouths to feed, not enough time to waste. You blink, and ocean replaces wood. You are officially not a tourist anymore. Your stomach growls not from hunger yet, though that's coming like a scheduled appointment, but from the unsettling realization that your body already knows it's in trouble. Food wasn't guaranteed on the voyage. It definitely isn't guaranteed here. You pass a boy selling apples, tiny, hard, bruised apples. You consider buying one until he announces the price with the confidence of a merchant selling diamonds. Colonial inflation is wild. Farther ahead, you see a group of settlers gathered around someone, reading a notice nailed to a post. You step closer. It's an announcement of new rules, strict, unforgiving rules about curfews, behavior, church attendance. Missing church isn't frowned upon. It's fined, punished, or investigated. Because here, the line between morality and survival has blurred so deeply that questioning it is suspicious. You continue walking and notice people staring. Not like the greeting kind of stare, more like the assessing kind, as if they're measuring the trouble you represent. Maybe your clothes look too clean, suggesting you're inexperienced. Maybe your posture says you're from the city. Maybe your silence says you're hiding something. Here's another solid historical fact. Colonists were terrified of outsiders bringing disease, dissent, or supernatural danger. A stranger arriving unannounced was a threat until proven useful. You finally find the lodging the woman described. The door leans like it's actively trying to escape the building. The man inside, tall, bearded, coated in sawdust, studies you like you're a horse he might buy but probably won't. He asks if you have coin. You nod. He asks if you have references. You pose. Wrong answer. He squints, then shrugs, because money is persuasive, and your face looks convincingly desperate. He gestures to a corner where a pile of straw implies the concept of a bed. You sit. Dust erupts. Something with many legs scurries away from your presence, offended that you have taken its spot. Welcome home. A moment passes, a quiet, surreal moment where it sinks in. You left behind electricity, running water, medicine, communication, and every comfort you ever considered basic. And here, surrounded by strangers, mud, uncertainty, and livestock that have more freedom than you do, you begin to understand the truth. Colonial America isn't a fresh start. It's a restart, back to a time when survival isn't assumed. When life expectancy isn't a number, you just live until you don't. And as the wind rattles the timber walls and the scent of harbour waste drifts through cracks like an uninvited guest, you realize you're already exhausted, and the day has barely begun. The night barely gives you rest. The straw beneath you feels like a personal vendetta, poking through the thin fabric of your clothes. Every time you shift, something rustles too alive, too close, too familiar with your presence already. Your eyes open and close out of instinct rather than sleep, and when dawn finally bleeds through the wooden slats, you are relieved only because the darkness no longer hides whatever kept you from drifting off. You sit up slowly, because if you move too fast, your spine reminds you it's 2,025 inches your heart, but 1,655 inches your bones. You stretch. Something cracks. You hope it was wood. When you step outside, the morning air should be refreshing, but instead feels like drinking a cold cup of dampness. Colonists don't greet mornings with coffee. Coffee is rare and precious here, so instead of a latte, you get a lungful of chimney smoke and a view of people already working, already tired, already resigned. And it hits you fast. Colonial America is awake before the sun, and sleep isn't rest, it's interruption. You wander into the lane, which is less a lane and more a suggestion of space between buildings. The mud has frozen into uneven ridges, like nature's attempt at medieval speed bumps. You try walking gracefully, your foot sinks nearly to the ankle. So much for dignity. A man across the street is starting a fire using flint and steel. You watch, amused and slightly smug, because how hard can it be, really? He scrapes, sparks, curses, mutters a prayer, scrapes again, and finally, with the persistence of someone who has been humbled by this ritual thousands of times, a small ember catches on the dried grass and cloth. But then he looks at you, lingering one moment too long, and gestures. Give it a go. He says it casually, but it feels like a challenge. You lean down, pick up the tools and begin. You strike. Nothing. You strike again. Nothing but a sad spark that fizzles in existential defeat. People are watching now, subtle, hidden behind their chore-occupied eyes. You strike again, too hard, and the metal slips from your hand into the mud. The man retrieves it with a half-smile, half-pity expression that transcends centuries. You have failed fire 101. Historians still argue whether urban-born colonists were truly less prepared than their rural counterparts. But either way, you've just confirmed to everyone around you that you are city-soft and possibly useless. A fringe tidbit. Colonists often carried small containers of smouldering char cloth wrapped in leaves to preserve fire, because creating flames from scratch was too time-consuming. Fire wasn't just light and heat, it was life insurance. You mutter something like, tricky, and attempt to bow out gracefully, but the damage is done. Your soft hands, your uncertain posture, your lack of calluses, they all betray you faster than your words. In a world without resumes, your body is your application, and yours says, intern. Next, you attempt to help draw water from the communal well. The bucket is heavier than expected. You pull the rope, feeling muscles complain that they didn't sign up for heavy labor this early in the simulation. The bucket slams against the side of the well, sloshing precious water back to where you don't want it. Someone groans. Not encouragingly. You finally set the bucket on the ground and try to lift it by the handle the way people do in movies, but the wood digs into your fingers like it wants to leave a permanent reminder. You spill some as you carry it okay, a lot, and place it near a doorway with a smile that begs, I contributed, but communicates, is water always this heavy? Your modern life depended on taps and appliances. Here, your survival depends on skill sets you never needed. Fire, water, tools. These are the opening levels, and you're already failing the tutorial. Now comes the forest. Someone suggests gathering small branches to help fuel the morning cooking. Just a little kindling, they say. Sounds simple enough, trees drop sticks, right? You walk out past the nearest houses, and suddenly the town stops, not like a suburb gently fading into farmland, but like the edge of a board game. One step you're near people, the next, nature swallows you whole. The forest is stunning towering trees, thick moss, tangles of brush. Beautiful, but indifferent. You step forward confidently, then freeze. Every sound is amplified. Leaves rustle, branches crack, a bird shrieks, something scurries underfoot. The difference between awe and fear is only how loud the unseen creatures sound. You crouch to pick up a stick. It crumbles into dust rot. You search again, another stick too thick to break, another too green to burn. You didn't realize wood had moods. And then you hear it howling. In the distance, but close enough to remind you that wolves didn't yet retreat into fairy tales. You scan the trees, trying to decipher the direction, but sound here travels strangely. Your heart accelerates, legs stiffen, and you decide that maybe the first stick you found, even if it was questionable, is good enough. You hurry back, cheeks flushed, hands empty aside from a single unimpressive twig. A woman raises an eyebrow. That's worse than words. Back in the settlement, frustration simmers beneath routine. People don't sigh, they groan. Tools clang, babies cry. Livestock protest being livestock. You try offering to help grind grain, but the wooden mill handle weighs as much as your confidence. After a few tries, your arms shake like they're auditioning for a low-budget earthquake documentary. Colonial survival isn't a hobby. It's a skill set earned through exhaustion. You try again. The handle turns a quarter rotation, then another. Your breath grows loud. Sweat forms because your body didn't ask for permission. One of the older men mutters something about newcomers. You're unsure if it's general commentary or specifically aimed at you. Either way, it stings. In the early colonies, everyone worked, men, women, children. If you were physically capable, you contributed. If you weren't well, people whispered. And now, someone is whispering. You attempt to do something simple, stacking chopped wood, but your neat modern pattern doesn't fit the rough, irregular logs. Every piece has personality. Every edge complains. The pile collapses with a thud that draws attention again. It's only mid-morning, and you're sweating, embarrassed, and more tired than you expected. You've had days at home when the most strenuous thing you did was argue with autocorrect. Here, your hands already ache, your back protests, and your pride has packed its bags. As the sun climbs higher, work doesn't slow, it intensifies. The colony isn't motivated by ambition or hustle culture. It's powered by survival and fear. You keep trying, dragging branches, hauling water, turning mills, but each task teaches you a lesson. You are not from here. You do not have the skills, and no amount of enthusiasm can replace experience. As noon approaches and the instinctive question rises, when's lunch? You realize something unsettling. Nobody has stopped working. Nobody is discussing food. Nobody is handing out menus. Your body, confused and betrayed, growls audibly. Someone glances at you. You force a smile and keep grinding grain. Because in colonial America, lunch isn't guaranteed, and neither is you. By now, hunger isn't a polite reminder, it's an uprising. Your body stages a protest in your stomach, complete with chants and a percussion section. You try to subtly clutch your midsection as you continue working, but subtlety left this place centuries ago. Someone finally calls out that the meal bell is ringing, and you feel hope bloom inside you like a Disney musical until the reality of colonial cuisine steps on it with muddy boots. You follow the others to a long table outside a large cabin, where food is spread out, but spread out may be generous. Wooden bowls, wooden spoons, wooden faces. The first dish appears to be porridge. Greyish, lumpy, steamless, a texture somewhere between glue and remorse. You sit, copy the others, bow your head. As a prayer is spoken, a long prayer, detailed, thorough, slightly competitive in its length. Your stomach starts eating your dignity. Finally, spoons scrape. You scoop some porridge. It jiggles as if resisting capture. You swallow it and are immediately transported to a world of disappointment. It tastes like someone boiled oats in sadness. Because here's your first historical fact of the section. Colonists preserved grain to survive winter, so meals were repetitive, bland, and often spoiled. You try not to make a face, but your eyebrows betray you. A woman across the table catches your reaction and raises an amused brow. You quickly shovel another spoonful, as if enthusiasm might make it better. It doesn't. Next comes bread, if bread could be compared to a brick, but less fluffy. It's hard, dense, and stale enough that you genuinely worry about dental coverage in 1650. Spoiler, there is none. The bread was baked weeks ago, maybe months, and has now transcended into a weapon. You try to tear a chunk. The bread wins. Someone hands you salted meat. Finally, protein your modern brain celebrates. You bite into it, and your mouth dries instantly, aggressively, like the meat has declared war on your saliva glands. Salted pork in colonial America wasn't seasoned. It was survival. Rationed. Salt wasn't a garnish. It was a prehistoric refrigerator. You chew, and chew, and chew. The meat tastes like it's recalling past traumas. Water is served brownish, cloudy, with visible floating bits that you desperately tell yourself are leaves. But inside, you hear a lonely whisper. That is not a leaf. Fringe tidbit time. Colonists often drank weak, small beer because water was unsafe. And water is exactly what you're drinking: unsafe, liquid hope. You sip, then cough. The table glances at you not with concern, but with "get used to it." You push the water slightly away, not far, because you know hydration matters, but enough to let microbial destiny take the wheel later. And then comes smell, an earthy, acidic scent, drifting from a pot. Someone ladles out a stew. It lands in your bowl with a wet thump. You look inside. Turnips, possibly onions, and something unidentifiable floating like a creature that lost a bet. You decide to eat around the mysterious object, but the stew has infused itself into everything. The broth carries the essence of despair. A bite of turnip tells you that it has been boiled until the concept of flavor dissolved, leaving only texture to mourn what once was. You glance at the others. They eat with the resigned efficiency of people who've accepted their fate. Food is fuel. Pleasure is a luxury. Historians still argue whether colonists viewed eating as dissatisfying or simply practical, but sitting here, cheeks hollowing emotionally, it doesn't feel like a debate. You manage to swallow enough to convince your body that mutiny can be postponed. You're not full. You're not even fed. You're simply no longer collapsing. After the meal, everyone resumes work. There's no dessert, no coffee, no take five. Just immediate transition from nourishment to labor, like someone accidentally deleted the break button from life. But the food saga isn't over, not by a long shot. In the afternoon, you're asked to help store salted fish for future use. You nod before your nose signs the consent form. The fish smell is not ordinary fish smell. It is fish multiplied by time and kept warm just long enough to develop a personality. The barrels are packed with layers of fish and salt, creating what can only be described as culinary fossilization. As you lean over to assist, a wave of stench hits so hard you lose track of your ancestors. Your eyes water. Your soul leaves briefly to get fresh air. The woman guiding you shrugs. You'll get used to it. You won't. Fish preservation is critical in a colony living on the edge of famine. fail to store enough, and winter becomes a villain that doesn't monologue, it just wins. You scrape fish scales for what feels like days, and finally, someone mentions food again, but before excitement can bloom, the phrase boiled cornmeal snuffs it out. Dinner is somehow worse than lunch, not in flavor, but in the emotional realization that this is not a one-time experience. This is the menu. Daily, weekly, endlessly. Salted meat, stale bread, porridge, turnips, repetition served family style. Your modern stomach, accustomed to oils, spices, sugar, refrigeration, and variety, begins negotiating with your brain. Brain says, "We need calories." Stomach replies, "At what cost?" You lie on your straw pile that night, if you can call lying, and silently regretting your dream's rest, and your gut churns. Your intestines are Googling evacuation routes your body never agreed to. Colonial digestion is not a gentle process. There are no probiotics, no herbal teas to soothe, no midnight snacks unless you count chewing on old bread, like a particularly depressing jaw workout. You curl up, clutching your stomach, wondering how colonists did this for decades, and then it clicks. They were born into it. You were not. And tomorrow, the food won't improve. Neither will the water. Neither will your stomach. Tomorrow, hunger comes earlier, with sharper teeth, with louder demands, because you are learning slowly, painfully, that in colonial America, food isn't enjoyed. It's survived. Morning doesn't arrive gently. It barges in like it has something to prove. The air you inhale is bitter cold, sharp enough to feel like it scrapes the inside of your nose. Your breath condenses in faint clouds, mingling with the haze from nearby chimneys. It should look cozy, storybook cozy, but it feels more like the world is exhaling frost straight into your soul. Your straw bed is damp, not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. The cabin walls have gaps that invite the weather inside, with zero concern for your personal comfort level. Colonial insulation isn't insulation. It's wood stacked in the hopeful direction of the wind. You step outside, and the cold slaps you across the face like it has been waiting all night for this moment. The sun is up, but warmth hasn't clocked in yet. The settlement is awake, people bundled in layers that look stitched together from anything available: wool, linen, patched leather, and what might once have been curtains. You tug your jacket closer. It's too thin, too modern, too unprepared. Colonial America does not care about your hoodie. Because here's your first historical fact of this section. Winters in many colonies were brutally unforgiving, especially in New England, where early settlers froze, starved, and rationed firewood as though warmth itself was currency. Homes were drafty, clothing was limited, and frostbite wasn't a surprise, it was a neighbor. Someone hands you a bucket and gestures toward the well again. You notice something you didn't see yesterday: the rope has frozen stiff. You try to tug it, but it resists with the stubborn patience of frozen fibers. You wrap your hands around it, pull harder, and instantly regret it. Your fingers sting, as if the cold is carving its initials into your skin. And you realize something unsettling. Gloves aren't optional here, they're survival equipment. But gloves are pricey, and leather is time-consuming, and wool loses warmth when wet. And everything is wet because winter here isn't a crisp hallmark snowfall. It's a damp, bone-soaking freeze that lingers like a bad memory. You finally manage to raise the bucket from the well, and the water inside is slush, half liquid, half winter's handwriting. You carry it back, spilling some because your hands are numb. A woman gives you a look, not angry, just resigned. Water wasted is work repeated. You warm your hands near a small fire outside a workshop and watch your breath drift upward like ghosts considering their options. Someone joins you, a farmer, broad-shouldered, cheeks raw from wind. He tells you that the summer was brutally hot, the fall too short, and now winter has declared early dominance. You blink. Hot? This place gets hot? He nods and explains that colonial summers were humid, sweltering, and mosquito-heavy, turning simple chores into sweat-soaked marathons. No fans, no AC, no refreshing iced drinks. Just laboring through heat while wearing layers because sunburn wasn't understood, and exposure meant sickness. Historians still argue whether the climate itself altered settlers' survival rates more than disease, but either way, weather here is not a background detail. It is a main character. Your mind tries to reconcile these extremes. Freezing dawns, suffocating afternoons, months of mud, weeks of drought, winds that roar, storms that vandalize. The weather isn't scenery, it's a bully. Today, frost clings to roofs and ground like powdered sugar on a dessert with no sweetness. You're asked to help gather firewood. It sounds simple until you realize gathering wood isn't just picking logs. It's chopping, splitting, hauling, stacking, protecting. Fire is life, and life requires sweat. Someone hands you an axe. Not a sleek, balanced, modern hardware store axe, no. This one is old, heavy, and shaped like it has opinions. You lift it and feel your spine reconsider its loyalty. You swing, awkwardly, and the blade glances off the log with a thud that mocks you. A boy, maybe 12 steps beside you, takes the axe, and in 2 precise swings, the log is reduced to neat pieces that fall satisfyingly into place. He shrugs, hands you the axe back, and walks away. You stare at the wood, the axe, your pride. None make eye contact. Your breath fogs again, thicker now. You wipe your nose with your sleeve because, spoiler, there are no tissues. You sniff, regret it, sniff again, regret that too. The wind picks up. It's sharp, unfiltered, offended that you exist. From the east, dark clouds gather like a meeting of sky-based villains. Snow begins falling, not fluffy and photogenic, but wet, icy needles that melt on your skin and sink into your clothes. Layer by layer, discomfort settles in. Your boots, designed for sidewalks and style, aren't prepared for slush, mud, or cold. Your socks soak. Your toes protest. You wiggle them to keep sensation alive. Barely. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind, overheard from someone earlier. Colonists sometimes stuffed their shoes with moss, straw, or wool scraps to keep their feet warm. Fashion is for people with thermostats. You find yourself doing the universal, "I'm cold" dance, shoulders up, arms crossed, hands tucked under your armpits, an instinct older than electricity. No one else dances. They endure, because they must. Firewood is finally stacked, and you're allowed inside a cabin to warm up. The heat from the hearth embraces you, but not gently. It's intense, almost aggressive, like a furnace set to dragon. Your face burns while your back remains cold, and you experience the uniquely colonial sensation of being roasted and refrigerated simultaneously. Smoke fills the room. Not just a little enough that you blink rapidly and tears slide down your cheeks. Colonial chimneys are unpredictable. Smoke often spills indoors. The air tastes like campfire and coughing, but warmth is warmth, so smoke is just a side effect of survival. Someone hands you a steaming bowl. You take it eagerly until you realize it's hot water with a hint of herbs. Not tea, not broth, just warm, slightly flavored hope. You sip anyway. The warmth travels down your throat and settles into your stomach like relief, wearing a cheap disguise. Outside, the storm intensifies. Snow and sleet slap the structures, rattling windows, whistling through cracks. Conversations quiet. Winter commands silence. You imagine summer, and how heat will replace cold, how mosquitoes will replace frostbite, how sweating will replace shivering. There is no comfortable season here, only rotating forms of discomfort. Colonial America does not pamper. It confronts. The weather shapes the buildings, the work, the moods, the struggles, the appetites, the failures. Entire lives are planned around surviving the temperature. You watch the flames. You stretch your fingers near the fire, feeling life return in tiny electric stings. Someone hands you a small piece of charcoal to rub on your shoes and attempt to waterproof them. It won't work well, but it's something. You stare at the storm through the frosted window and realize you don't fear the cold. You fear the length of it, because winter isn't a night. It's a season, a long, merciless test, and you are only on day one. By the time evening crawls back, your body already feels like it has aged a decade in a day. You've shivered through the wind, hauled reluctant buckets of icy water, gathered firewood with hands still red from earlier attempts, and eaten another round of food that your digestive system is reviewing like a harsh film critic. You think just maybe you're adapting, but Colonial America waits for such thoughts because that's when it hits back. You're sitting inside a cramped cabin, warming your fingers near the fire, when someone coughs behind you. Not a casual cough, not the throat-clearing kind. This one is deep, wet, rattling, like the lungs are trying to climb out and escape. You try not to look, but the sound demands attention. The woman coughs again, harder this time, clutching a cloth to her mouth. When she pulls it away, she inspects it quietly. You see a reddish smear before she folds the cloth and tucks it away. No one reacts. No one panics. No one suggests she rest or take medicine or go to a doctor. Because here, a cough is not an emergency. It's background noise. And that is when the danger begins to reveal itself, slow, silent, invisible. Your first historical fact of this section. Diseases killed more colonists than starvation, war, accidents, and weather combined. You suddenly become hyper-aware of your surroundings. A tightly packed room, smoke, soaked air, people sharing spoons, shared bedding, shared tools, shared breath. No ventilation. No germ theory. No hand sanitizer clipped to a belt loop. Children run across the room barefoot, stepping through mud that followed them inside. Someone sneezes close enough that you feel a faint mist on your cheek. A historic handshake, colonial edition. You wipe your face discreetly and instantly wish you had modern soap. The soap currently available is lumpy, harsh, and smells like animal fat because, well, that's literally what it is. And it doesn't kill bacteria, it just encourages them to relocate. You shift uncomfortably as someone explains that winter fever has hit several families. Fever, such a small word for something that, here, often means death. A fringe tidbit floats through your mind, something you overheard earlier. Some colonists believed illness came from bad smells, so people wore small sachets of herbs, flowers, or vinegar-soaked sponges around their necks, thinking fragrance could repel disease. It didn't. It just made sick rooms smell like sick rooms plus lavender. You watch as a man approaches a child coughing on the floor. He ties a small bundle of dried mint and rosemary to her collar. It looks sweet. It smells pleasant. It does nothing. Someone asks if you are feeling fit, which means healthy, not athletic. You nod quickly, perhaps too quickly, because hesitation here is suspicious. Illness doesn't just weaken bodies, it weakens communities. If you can't work, you're a burden. If you're contagious, you're a threat. Your mind wanders modern memories of pharmacies with fluorescent aisles of medicine, cough drops shaped like fruit but tasting like chemicals, antibiotics, vaccines, doctors who don't use saws unless absolutely necessary. Which brings us to a fun but horrifying scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether early colonial medical treatments cured more people than they harmed, or whether survival simply depended on luck and an aggressively stubborn immune system. You silently pray to every deity you can think of, modern and colonial, that your immune system got the memo. Dinner is the same salty, questionable menu, but now paranoia seasons the meal. You lift your cup and hesitate. Who touched this? Whose lips touched this before? There are no dishwashers. Washing dishes in winter requires water, heat, and energy, all luxuries. So cups and bowls are wiped with a cloth that lives its entire life on the edge of becoming a biohazard. You eye the cloth. It eyes you back. You drink anyway. The night grows colder, and the fire shrinks, consumed faster than the colony can chop. Wood is rationed like survival tokens. One of the men places a small log on the fire, with the solemn ceremony of someone submitting their last offering. You lie down on your straw bed again, and as you settle, you notice the rustling beneath you. Tiny roommates. Colonists didn't have pest control. They had acceptance. Fleas, lice, bedbugs. They thrive here. They feast on newcomers the way mosquitoes find tourists irresistible. You scratch your arm and stop halfway. Don't think about it. Thinking makes it real. Someone nearby mutters incoherently in their sleep, coughing between phrases that sound like nightmares negotiating with reality. Across the room, the coughing woman wheezes again, longer this time. You hear her gasp for breath, then settle into a rattling rhythm that sounds suspiciously like her lungs are filling with more than air. You turn your face toward the cold wall, but the sound follows you. Breathing becomes something you notice. You wait for silence. It doesn't come. Disease here doesn't knock. It drifts. On breath. On cloth. On shared spoons. On kindness. You finally close your eyes. Not because tiredness wins, but because awareness is exhausting. Your modern instincts whisper, you need medicine, you need doctors, you need distance. But colonial America responds, you need luck, and luck is in very short supply. The morning starts with screaming not dramatic, screaming the frustrated kind, the exhausted kind, the why is this happening again kind. You jolt awake, tangled in scratchy fabric and stale air, trying to place the sound. Outside, two men are hauling someone toward the center of the settlement, shouting over each other. You rub your eyes, thinking maybe you're dreaming, but the cold floor and the aching in your lower back confirm you are disappointingly conscious. People begin to gather, forming a loose crowd or maybe a not-so-loose court of public opinion. You follow because curiosity has gravity, and also because everyone else is going, which means if you don't, someone might ask why. At the center of the town stands something that looks like playground equipment designed by someone who hated children. Wooden posts, thick timbers, iron restraints. You've seen images before in textbooks, documentaries, Halloween decorations, stocks, and pillories. They're real, they're here, and they are not themed attractions. A young man barely older than you struggles against the grip of the men dragging him. His face is red from cold and panic. He shouts something about misunderstanding. Someone shouts back something about theft. It becomes clear quickly that colonial justice has a speed modern systems could never match. A complaint, a witness, a few nods of agreement, and that's all. No trial today, no paperwork, no 9-month court backlog because the judge went golfing. The man is forced into the stocks, his head and hands locked forward through heavy boards that slam shut with the sound of inevitability. He curses, and a woman nearby gasps as though the profanity is more offensive than the wooden restraint currently crushing his dignity. You swallow hard. Your modern brain tries to rationalize context, law and order. Theft has consequences. Societies maintain structure with rules. But your modern soul whispers, this looks brutal. And then you remember colonial America doesn't whisper back. It enforces. Here's your first historical fact of this section. Public punishment wasn't just discipline, it was spectacle. A tool to shame, deter, and remind everyone that survival required unity and obedience. A child approaches the confined man and throws a clump of mud. Others snicker. Some adults join, not throwing but judging with their eyes arguably sharper than stones. The air is thick with quiet satisfaction and quiet fear, the two most powerful forms of social control. Your stomach churns not just from nausea, not just from yesterday's questionable stew, but from the sudden realization that embarrassment here is not emotional. It's physical. Your eyes catch motion in the corner, a wooden whip hanging from a wall. You look away quickly, because acknowledging its existence feels like permission for it to exist closer. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind as you overhear two people whisper. In some colonies, you could be punished for idleness, literally fined or whipped for looking unproductive. You instinctively stand straighter, as if slouching might summon consequences. You decide to back away quietly, but the colonist beside you, a stern woman with folded arms, asks where you're going. You answer vaguely, to help. Help with what? You don't specify. She studies you for one long second that feels like a thesis defense. She nods barely and lets you pass. You breathe out only once you're several steps away. Punishment isn't the only method used to enforce obedience. Shame is a daily tool. Gossip here spreads faster than disease and is just as damaging. Speak incorrectly, dress oddly. Fail to bow your head long enough in prayer, and eyes linger. Questions form. Historians still argue whether colonial communities relied more on religion or fear to maintain order. But standing here, fear seems to be winning by a slim but effective margin. Later in the day, you're asked to help with animal pens. You agree immediately because any task far from the center of town sounds great. You shovel mud, or what hopes to be mud. You haul hay that clings to your damp clothes, like it has fallen in love with you, and you try to stay unnoticed. But colonial America doesn't let people stay invisible for long. Toward afternoon, a voice calls your name or something close to it, the pronunciation mangled like every vowel is improvisation. You turn, nervous. It's the bearded man who owns the cabin you're sleeping in. He gestures for you to follow. Your heart lodges somewhere near your throat as he leads you back toward town. The crowd has thinned, but the man in the stocks remains silent now, head lowered. The bearded man stops and looks at you. His expression is unreadable, not angry, not kind. Neutral in the most unsettling way. "We expect everyone to work," he says, not threateningly, but as fact. "We don't have room for loafers, or strangers who don't pull weight." You nod, vigorously, perhaps too vigorously. You assure him you understand, though your voice cracks like a teenage violin. He studies you again, then walks away. Your knees nearly buckle with relief. You glance once more at the man locked in wood, his face pale where it isn't flushed from tears or cold. You wonder what he stole. Food? Tools? Boots? In this place, survival doesn't just tempt crime, it demands it. And punishment doesn't just correct, it warns. That night, you lie still, careful not to cough, sneeze, mutter, or be suspiciously awake. You replay the scene, the sound of wood closing around someone's future. Your mind drifts through uncomfortable questions. If Hunganaus lure tomorrow? If cold bites deeper? If someone accuses you wrongly? If the community doubts your usefulness? How long before your neck knows the weight of that wooden board? Because in colonial America, mistakes aren't lessons. They're sentences. Morning breaks, but it doesn't feel like a clean slate. It feels like the next chapter in a script you didn't audition for. You step outside and notice the quiet. Not peaceful, quiet, controlled quiet. Stillness wrapped in expectation. People are moving, but softly, deliberately, as if the air itself requires reverence. Then you realize it's Sunday, but not Sunday like you know it. There are no lazy mornings with blankets and phones, no brunch, no cartoons, no skipping because you're not feeling it today. Here, Sunday is not an invitation, it's a requirement. The church bell rings, once, twice, over and over with calculated rhythm, not beautiful, functional, a sound that commands rather than inspires. Everyone walks toward the church not casually, not socially, as duty. You follow, because being the only person not walking toward the church feels like voluntarily declaring yourself suspicious. The church building is simple, wooden, plain, drafty, no stained glass, no choir robes, no painted ceiling where angels float with idealized musculature, just long benches filled with settlers who look equally solemn and sleep-deprived. A man stands at the front, not on an ornate stage, but a raised platform. He begins speaking, not softly, not conversationally. His voice is the hammer and anvil of the morning. The sermon is long, not 30 minutes long, marathon long, hours long. Your body cycles through every posture evolution ever invented. Straight, slouched, knees crossed, uncrossed, shifting left, shifting right, hands folded, hands unclasped, and eventually your soul leaves to get some air. Because here's your must-have fact of this section. In many colonial towns, laws enforced church attendance. Missing service could lead to fines, questioning, or worse. Religion wasn't weekend culture, it was governance. You listen, at least you think you do, but the language is dense, the tone is stern, and the message is clear. Obedience is survival, disobedience is danger. The preacher speaks about outsiders bringing corruption. Eyes subtly glance your way. You sit straighter. He warns against those who question their elders. You nod enthusiastically, maybe too enthusiastically. A woman beside you stares just long enough to make your brain panic. Then comes singing not upbeat, not joyful somber hymns in minor tones. You try to hum along, fail, and lower your volume until you are basically lip-syncing for your eternal life. Hours later, many hours later, service ends. But nobody leaves. The preacher announces a meeting. Announcements, community decisions, grievances. These are not democratic. Voices matter, but some voices matter. Someone whispers, "They missed service last week." The tone is not sympathetic. The sermon from this morning echoes in your mind phrases about sin, discipline, purity, community. You think of the man in the stocks 2 days ago. You begin to understand that punishment and religion aren't separate tools here. They're neighboring rooms in the same building. Historians still argue whether religion was the colony's lifeline or leash. Faith bonded people, offered hope, explained suffering, but it also controlled behavior with invisible strings stronger than iron. You reach the cabin and notice something unsettling. Your thoughts are quieter, filtered, edited. You begin rehearsing your responses before speaking, measuring your gestures, monitoring your expressions, not because you've embraced the lifestyle, but because survival here isn't just physical, it's ideological. During the evening meal, the family bows their heads for grace. You bow yours, slightly slower, making sure it looks natural. When they say, Amen, you say it too, but too early. A half second off. They notice everything. Someone asks if you are adjusting. You say, yes. They wait, expecting more. You add, grateful. They nod. You exhale. You go to sleep that night thinking about how belief here isn't merely spiritual. It's infrastructure. It's currency. It's protection from neighbors, from accusations, from the unknown. In your straw bed, you whisper silently, not tears, not prayers, just breath, hoping breath alone isn't incriminating. Because in colonial America, faith keeps you sheltered, and questioning keeps you cold. The next day, you wake not to screaming, or coughing, or punishment, just silence. Which is worse, somehow. Silence here doesn't soothe. It anticipates. It's the quiet breath before a storm, literal or metaphorical, and you have learned to distrust both. Your body aches as you stand, calves tight from uneven terrain, shoulders sore from hauling things you previously thought only trucks should haul. You stretch, wince, pretend you didn't, and step outside into the chilly morning air. People aren't gathered for chores yet. They're gathered in clumps, small, tense circles of whispering bodies. Their eyes keep drifting toward the tree line, where the forest stands tall and ominous, like a wall grown by nature instead of built by men. Something is wrong. The bearded man approaches you. There was a sighting, he says. A sighting of what? Slips out of your mouth before caution can stop it. He gives you a look, not annoyed, not angry, just quietly surprised you would ask. People, he says. Natives. Your heart rate ticks up not because the presence of other humans should be frightening, but because you can feel the settlement's anxiety like electricity in the ground. You stand still and listen. The whispers intensify. Some settlers worry aloud about crops, others about livestock. A few say nothing but grip tools a little tighter, not farming tools but axes and muskets. And here comes your required historical fact for this section. Colonial settlers entered land already inhabited, traded, negotiated, cooperated, and also trespassed, disrupted, threatened, and fought. Relations varied wildly, depending on leaders, needs, misunderstandings, and desperation. One man insists they need to send a group to warn them not to come closer. Another argues that doing so would provoke trouble. A woman protests that their food stores can't support new trade expectations. Someone else mentions an agreement that was supposedly made last season, but the wording was vague, the language is different, and memories unreliable. Historians still argue whether many early conflicts arose intentionally or through cultural misunderstandings too large to bridge. Right now, misunderstanding feels like the leading cause. The bearded man hands you a task tending to the animals, because apparently you're not ready to participate in frontier diplomacy. You accept the assignment with the enthusiasm of someone who would like to avoid any and all situations involving muskets. You lead goats toward a fenced area that you sincerely hope is more secure than it looks. The animals bleat, resistant to every suggestion you make. You glance toward the forest occasionally, half expecting figures to emerge silently between the trees because everything out here moves silently except settlers. You overhear snippets of conversation drifting your way. They passed close at dusk. Could have been scouting, maybe trading, maybe watching us, maybe hungry. That last one sits heavily. When you return the goats, a group of men is preparing to go out. Muskets checked, powder horns filled, blades sharpened. Their faces calm, too calm. The practiced calm of people who've accepted fear as a co-worker. No one invites you. You are relieved, and insulted, and relieved again. As they disappear into the trees, the settlement becomes a held breath. Chores resume, but slowly. Conversations trail off quickly. Children are pulled closer. Every sound is examined. Even bird calls seem suspicious. The afternoon drags like time itself is slogging through mud. When the group returns hours later, faces stern, clothes damp, steps heavy, you watch silently from the side. No contact, someone reports. Tracks, says another. So they're close, someone concludes. No one cheers. No one sighs in relief. The unknown is worse than confrontation. The evening meal is quiet. Quieter than church. Even spoons seem hesitant to touch bowls. You hear one woman speak in a hushed tone about alliances, stories of trade partnerships, shared harvests, intermarriages in some regions. Another counters with stories of raids, burning crops, taken lives. There is no single narrative. There never was. And your modern mind, trained on documentaries, dramatizations, simplified school chapters, tries to categorize this. But here, now, straddling the line between two worlds, categories feel insulting. You think back to geography lessons that showed empty land on maps, blank spaces, untouched wilderness. But standing here, surrounded by these settlers, and staring toward those trees, you understand the arrogance of blank spaces. They were blank only to the people drawing the maps. Later that night, as you lie on your straw not supposed to be a mattress, you hear a sound faint, distant, but distinct from the tree line. Not an animal, not wind, something human. Everyone freezes. Even the fire seems to hesitate. The sound fades. Work resumes. Breathing resumes. But sleep does not come easily. You imagine two camps, yours and theirs, both lying awake, listening to the same night, uncertain of the other's intentions. Fear mirrored through trees. You close your eyes and exhale slowly. Because in colonial America, you don't just fear the wilderness. You fear who already calls it home. By now, your body has accepted that comfort is a bedtime story and that soreness is the new roommate who didn't ask permission to move in. But today, the bearded man wakes you earlier than usual, so early that the sky looks unfinished, as if someone forgot to paint it. Up, he says. Work starts at first light. You want to reply, this isn't first light, but sarcasm, you've learned, carries a health risk here. You throw on your cold, stiff clothing that has all the softness of a frozen tarp. Outside, the fields wait long stretches of dirt that looks harmless until you're the one responsible for convincing it to produce food. Welcome to back-breaking labor. You knew colonial life involved farming, but you imagined it romantically, sun-shining, gentle breeze. Maybe a bird harmonizing with your progress. The reality? Mud clings to your shoes like emotional attachment. The plow blade catches on every rock the earth has collected. The ox pulling it is in a bad mood, probably because it, too, lives here. Your first historical fact arrives like the smell of manure. Agriculture powered colonial survival, and nearly every man, woman, and child worked the land. Hard, daily. The bearded man hands you a wooden hoe-less tool, more punishment device, and points to a row. Loosen the soil, he says. So you begin. At first, your strokes are confident, rhythmic, almost productive. You think, hey, this might not be so bad. And then your spine sends a strongly worded letter to management. You adjust posture, grip, angle. Nothing helps. The sun rises reluctantly, offering light without warmth. Soon, sweat forms anyway, because your body has been tricked into thinking you're running a marathon while wearing badly designed historical cosplay. You take a short break, by which I mean 3 seconds, and immediately someone shouts, "Keep at it!" The tone isn't angry. It's impatient in a way that says food supply depends on your lower back. You push through. Each row is longer than it looks like the colonial version of misleading treadmill distance. Your arms tremble. Blisters form. You suspect your muscles are Googling other users. The bearded man checks your progress. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His silence reviews your performance like a 2-star Yelp rating. Next comes hauling water to the crops. 2 buckets, one on each side, hanging from a wooden yoke across your shoulders. The weight is astonishing. You wobble like a confused flamingo. Water sloshes onto your clothes, your shoes, the ground everywhere except where it's supposed to go. You lose more water than you deliver. Fringe tidbit. Colonists often preferred children for certain field tasks because their lighter weight compacted the soil less. Congratulations, your usefulness is now being compared to an 11-year-old. By midday, your shirt is damp with sweat and damp with water, and damp with the universal dampness that defines everything here. Your hands burn, your legs tremble. Your back feels like someone replaced your spine with a wooden broom handle. You sit down on accident, really. Your legs give up the concept of being legs and transition to decorative sticks. You sit in the dirt, panting, as the bearded man's wife hands you a small piece of bread and a gulp of weak ale. You swallow both without tasting either. No one says, "Good job." There is no hydration break. Motivation speeches aren't invented yet. Food equals, keep going. You return to work because not returning isn't an option. After soil loosening and watering comes grain grinding that mill handle again. You push, and your shoulder pops in a way that suggests it has filed a complaint. Then corn shucking. Then wood carrying. Then feeding animals. Then more hauling. It doesn't stop. There is no end of shift whistle. There is no weekend. Work continues until the sun begins to dim, and even then tasks spill indoors, mending clothing, drying seeds, repairing tools. And here, with your fingers pricked by thread and your vision blurring from smoke, you grasp something critical. Labor isn't an activity here. It's existence. Historians still argue whether colonial communities were resilient out of necessity, or simply because the weak didn't survive long enough to be counted. In the evening you visit the river with a group to wash clothes by hand, in icy water that gnaws at your skin like tiny cold-toothed piranhas. The garments, once wet, weigh approximately the mass of Jupiter. You wring them with hands that no longer respond to commands. You carry them back, ungracefully, arms shaking, droplets freezing on your sleeves. At dinner, the salted meat tastes exactly the same as yesterday, and exactly as it will tomorrow if you're lucky enough to have it tomorrow. After the meal, chores continue. Someone hands you a tool to mend a broken latch. You stare at it like it's ancient alien technology. The man beside you fixes his in seconds. You poke at yours until it resembles not fixed, but slightly more bent. He eventually takes the tool from your hands and fixes it himself. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Your pride already heard the message. You fall into your straw bed without ceremony. Every muscle throbs. Your bones pulse. Even your hair hurts. And as your eyes close, another unsettling realization arrives quiet, slow, honest. You were tired before this day even started. This wasn't a test. This was Tuesday. Because in colonial America, survival isn't dramatic. It's exhausting. You wake up sore, but it's a familiar soreness now, the kind that says, "Congratulations, your body is slowly accepting its new life as machinery." You step outside expecting to fall back into the endless loop of labor, hunger, sleep, not sleep, repeat, but today has a new surprise. Money, or rather the concept of money, which feels deceptively simple until colonial America introduces plot twists. The bearded man walks with you toward the small trading post. The structure looks like someone tried to build a store out of driftwood and stubbornness. You enter a room lined with shelves, but not filled shelves. Sparse is the theme. A few tools, thread, salt, tobacco, candles, dried fish, and a jug that probably contains something flammable and expensive. You look for price tags. There are none. The trader greets the bearded man by name, but looks at you the way a bouncer looks at someone wearing sandals to a nightclub. He asks what you've come for, and the bearded man says, "Need more flour and nails." The trader nods and gives a price, not in dollars, not in coins, not even in a single currency. He wants payment in wheat and labor. Yes, labor as currency. Because here's your anchor fact for this section. Colonial economies ran on a tangled system of coins, credit, bartering, IOUs, and favors. Money existed, but wasn't consistent. In many places, there simply wasn't enough physical currency to use. You glance around the store. A small bag of sugar costs more than your confidence. A hammer is worth days of work. A spool of thread could be traded like gold. And then it gets stranger. The trader and the bearded man begin discussing prices. But the numbers don't sound like numbers, they sound like negotiations. Flour today costs more than last week because a shipment was late, or the weather was bad, or the trader woke up feeling ambitious. Inflation isn't a chart here. It's mood-based. You step outside with the goods, and an unsettling realization. Nothing in colonial America feels certain, not weather, not food, not safety, not health, not money. Your brain tries to process the concept that your time, your body, your energy is a currency. Your labor is your paycheck, your insurance, your survival. You return to work, but now every grain of wheat you plant feels like a coin you're burying in the ground, hoping it grows into next month's shoes. Later, you overhear conversations near the well. Some people are upset about debts. Not credit card debts, not loans, personal debts. A man owes tobacco to another man for helping repair a roof. He doesn't have tobacco now. The due date is approaching, and due dates here aren't gentle. One older woman whispers about a neighbor nearly losing his land because of a debt dispute. Land not something you rent, something you defend with paperwork that barely exists and witnesses who may or may not remember accurately. A fringe tidbit slips into relevance like a sneaky raccoon. In some colonies, people used dried corn, beaver pelts, or even musket balls as currency when coins were scarce. Imagine trying to divide your paycheck into equal piles of ammunition to pay bills. That afternoon, someone approaches you quietly, almost casually, and asks if you can spare some of that bread you were seen carrying yesterday. You freeze. You want to help. You truly do. But you also know hunger already lives in your gut, like a tenant who refuses to move. You offer half. The man nods gratefully but doesn't say thank you out loud. Maybe gratitude feels risky in public. You walk away wondering if sharing makes you kind, or foolish, or indebted, because everything here costs something. Later, you sit near the fire, sharpening a dull tool, your least favorite new hobby, and a small group begins discussing rumors from another town. Something about counterfeit coin. Someone tried to forge crude currency to buy supplies. The punishment? Severe. Public. Memorable. Historians still argue whether colonial scarcity pushed people toward crime or whether harsh punishments created criminals by desperation. But either way, the line between survival and theft is a thread that frays easily. That evening, the bearded man brings up something you didn't know was coming. Lodging. You've been staying in his cabin for days now. Nothing is free. He explains calmly that you owe work to compensate or trade, or coin if you ever get coin. Rent exists, even here. You nod, accepting the terms because there are no alternatives. Your mind drifts briefly to modern leases, to rental agreements written on paper, signed with pens, protected by laws. Here, your signature is your word, and your word is enforceable in ways you'd rather not test. You lie down in your straw bed that night, exhausted, stomach rumbling softly like thunder that forgot its lines. You stare at the ceiling, wondering about debts, favors, repayment, survival. Your thoughts spiral softly, like smoke rising to vanish against the wood. You came here thinking adventure waited, but colonial America isn't adventure. It's accounting. You've begun to accept that every morning introduces a new form of discomfort. Today's is the realization that the walls of your cabin may technically count as indoors, but only in the loosest possible definition. A breeze glides past your ear, even though every window is shut. The door is closed, yet the scent of damp earth and smoke wafts freely through seams wide enough for insects to consider them legitimate highways. You stretch, sit up, and immediately hear scratching close. Inside? Outside? Hard to tell. It stops, then resumes, a little bolder. Your imagination hopes it's a mouse. Your realism suggests something with more emotional confidence. You step outside and get your visual confirmation, a collection of small holes dug along the cabin's edge. Creatures live under your home, and not because you adopted them. Your first historical fact of this section hits like a breeze through rotten wood. Early colonial homes were often poorly insulated, drafty, damp, smoky, and pest-ridden, because speed of construction mattered more than comfort. In short, your house is a suggestion. Inside, the walls are timber planks, with gaps that could send postcards to each other. The floor isn't so much a floor as flattened dirt pretending to be shy. You look around and notice that most homes have similar designs. Simple squares, steep roofs, small windows to keep heat in, though in is aspirational. Today's chore is repairing the roof after yesterday's windstorm. The bearded man hands you bundles of thatch-tight collections of reeds that look like broom bristles still in therapy. You help climb the ladder, and immediately regret every assumption about your balance reflexes. Up close, the roof looks precarious, sloped at an angle that encourages gravity to think creatively. You watch as the bearded man works expertly, weaving the thatch in layers that shed water instead of absorbing it. When he motions for you to take over, your brain screams, "My entire understanding of roofing comes from having once watched a YouTube video at 2 a.m. You attempt your first patch. The thatch slips. Your fingers fumble. You tie the wrong knot, or maybe you invent a new one. Either way, water will test your work with the patience of an interrogator. Below, two goats stare at you with judging eyes. You climb down slowly, because ladders in colonial America have all the safety features of a stick leaning against hope. Inside the house, the smoke from the fireplace hangs like an uninvited guest refusing to take hints. The chimney draws sometimes, only sometimes. When wind direction disagrees, the cabin becomes a personal BBQ pit, minus the barbecue. The ceiling is stained from years of smoke, and your throat feels coated in a light seasoning of soot. You cough gently and instantly regret calling attention to your lungs. Fringe tidbit. Some colonists believed smoke helped preserve food hung near the rafters, which has the bonus side effect of seasoning your laundry, bedding, skin, and soul. You help cook today, or at least, you stand near the fire while someone else cooks and occasionally pass objects, which technically counts. Your eyes water non-stop. Blinking becomes your second profession. The hearth isn't just a stove. It's heating, cooking, light, laundry, pest deterrent, allegedly, and family gathering space. Children hover dangerously close to open flames because there are no safety gates, no warnings printed in bold letters, and definitely no childproof anything. Someone hands you a pot to scrub. The bottom is blackened with soot, layered thicker than frosting on a birthday cake. You scrub with sand, with rags, with frustration. The pot remains unconvinced. While carrying buckets of water back inside, you trip on the uneven threshold, a lip of wood that has warped from years of rain, frost, mud, and footsteps. The bucket sloshes, spilling precious water onto the dirt floor, which absorbs it like sarcastic applause. That wasted water means someone must haul more, that someone is you. Later, the bearded man begins reinforcing the walls with a mixture that looks suspiciously like mud. Because it is mud mixed with straw and pressed into cracks by hand. You join in, pushing the sloppy mixture into gaps, creating a seal that promises to repel at least 1% of future wind. Historians still argue whether wattle and daub building techniques were efficient innovations or desperate compromises, but given your current numb fingers and mud-covered sleeves, it feels like both. When night comes, the house traps heat unevenly fire-baked next to the hearth, winter chilled in every corner. You decide to sleep closer to warmth, but so does everyone else. Personal space collapses into a shared concept. You lie there, half toasty, half frozen, fully tired, and then you hear it, scratching again. Not outside, inside. Something skitters across the floor near your straw. You freeze. You don't breathe. You rethink every decision that led to this moment, especially the one where you agreed to time travel mentally. The bearded man, without opening his eyes, mutters that it's just the rats. Just the rats. You pull the blanket up to your chin, not because it protects you, but because illusion is better than reality. You stare at the rafters, still smoky, still stained, still holding mysterious dangling shapes you hope are herbs and not animals. And as the fire dies slowly into faint orange glow, you understand deeply, a colonial house isn't shelter. It's negotiation. Between you and the weather, between warmth and smoke, between comfort and pests, between expectations and survival. The roof leaks, the walls breathe, the floor shifts, the smoke lingers. But it's home, because there isn't another one. And because in colonial America, indoors is a privilege, not a guarantee. You wake to a sound you haven't yet heard in the colony, sharp voices cutting through the early morning chill. Not angry, not alarmed debating. You sit up slowly, your joints still negotiating their terms of employment, and step outside to see several adults gathered, while the older children are already performing chores with the competence of tiny, exhausted professionals. You rub your eyes and freeze. A young girl, maybe 12, trudges by carrying a bucket almost half her size. A boy about 10 is hauling chopped logs. 2 others are grinding grain with the determination of underpaid interns. You blink again. No school, no playtime, no cartoons, no sleeping in. Childhood here is not a phase, it's a workforce. And your anchor fact arrives like a puff of chimney smoke. Colonial childhood wasn't defined by exploration and imagination, it was defined by labor, discipline, obedience, and survival. A small girl offers you a wooden cup of water. You take it, say thank you, and she nods with a seriousness that feels too heavy for her face. She then trots off to stir a pot near the fire barefoot, in temperatures that make your toes reject their own existence. The bearded man hands you a tool and says simply, "We'll need help reinforcing the fence." No, good morning. No pleasant preamble. It's implied that the morning becomes good only after fences are reinforced. As you walk alongside him, you pass another group children, again hunched together, carding wool. They pull and straighten fibers with quiet focus, hands red from friction and cold. You watch for a moment before your contemporary brain whispers, "Shouldn't they be in a classroom?" Then you remember they are. This is the classroom. Life is the curriculum. Tests are weekly and graded on survival. You help hammer stakes into the muddy ground. The tool slips, hitting your thumb. Pain rockets up your arm like a firework that regrets its existence. You yelp loudly because pain makes you fluent. The bearded man glances not out of concern, but measurement. Nearby, a mother shouts at her son, not gently, not softly. His mistake? Dropping a pail of herbs. The scolding is fierce and swift. The boy's eyes glass with tears, but he doesn't cry, not outwardly. Tears here aren't protected under emotional safety laws. Punishment works differently, faster, more physical. You hear about a boy being whipped last week for stealing honey. Stealing honey. You picture a 10-year-old's hands and a leather strap meeting like bitterness and skin. Fringe tidbit. Some colonial parents believed affection bred weakness, and that strict severity ensured moral character. Hugs were rarities. Encouragement was a luxury. You watch as a girl, maybe 7, is taught how to stitch a torn sleeve. Her stitches are crooked. Her mother rips the thread out and tells her to start again. No praise, no nice try, just pressure. Later, while repairing the fence, you overhear the older men talking about apprenticeships, boys as young as 8 being sent to live with other families to learn trades. Families didn't always choose based on personality or comfort. The community decided based on need. You ask quietly, "And the children don't get a say?" The bearded man gives you a look like you've asked whether the wind negotiates its direction. His answer is simple. They go where they're told. The idea sits on your chest like a weight. No childhood dreams. No asking what they want to be when they grow up. Growing up is already happening. Dreams are luxury goods no one imports. Someone mentions marriage, your mind immediately thinks adulthood. But here, marriage can happen as early as mid-teens. By 16, boys are expected to contribute fully. Girls are expected to manage households, raise siblings, prepare for motherhood. Historians still argue whether colonial society protected families through structure or suffocated them through control. But seeing children carry responsibilities larger than their frames, it feels more suffocation than safety. In the afternoon, you help the children gather kindling. One boy asks where you came from. You try to keep your answer vague. He nods like none of it matters. In his world, distance is measured in miles walked barefoot, not stories told. He asks what you did as a child. You almost say school, games, weekends, birthdays at amusement parks, being encouraged to follow your dreams. You stop. None of it fits here. None of it translates. You say simply, "I learned." He shrugs. So do we. He isn't wrong, but the learning here is different. Harder, sharper, less forgiving. And the consequences of failure aren't grades. They're survival, reputation, punishment. As evening drops its curtain, you watch the children tend fires, mend tools, care for siblings, and fight sleep not because they're told to stay awake, but because work remains. And it strikes you quietly, deeply. Childhood isn't lost here. It never existed. And the numbers don't favor you. By now you have learned to stay quiet when you don't understand something, nod even when you disagree, and work even when your body drafts formal complaints. But tonight, you learn a new lesson, one you never expected to confront so soon. The meeting. The entire settlement gathers in the large cabin, the one used for sermons, announcements, debates, disguised as decisions. Decisions disguised as divine instruction. The benches creak under bodies worn down from work, weather, and worry. Candles flicker, casting shadows that make the room feel alive, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. A man stands at the front, not the preacher this time, but someone with authority, older, sharp-eyed, respected in that silent way earned through years of never backing down. He begins addressing the room, discussing trade shortages, winter preparation, and the absence of a shipment that should have arrived weeks ago. But the tone shifts when he mentions the word disputes. That word settles on everyone like fresh snow, quiet, cold, heavy. A woman stands. She accuses her neighbor of letting his livestock roam too near her garden. The neighbor insists it was an honest mistake. Voices rise. The room crackles with tension. And before you can imagine a calm resolution, the moderator asks for witnesses. 2 people step forward. Their statements differ slightly, not contradicting, but coloring the scene with their personal tint of memory. And here arrives the critical fact of this section. Colonial justice was influenced heavily by reputation, witness testimony, and community perception, more than physical evidence or legal protocol. In short, the law remembers who you are more than what happened. The decision is swift. The man must pay compensation in grain. His face drops. Discipline here costs calories. Another dispute follows, this time about accusations that someone took extra turns at the well. Then another about someone missing church due to illness that others didn't witness. Silence falls the way it does right before thunder. The older man at the front says something chillingly bureaucratic. We cannot permit deviation. Your stomach knots. Then it happens. Your name surfaces. At first you think you imagined it just a syllable floating through candle smoke. But heads turn. Eyes land on you. You sit upright so quickly you nearly lift off the bench. Someone speaks cautiously, not aggressively, mentioning that you were seen declining water during yesterday's meal. A strange thing. Unusual. Maybe disrespectful. Maybe arrogant. Your heart stammers. You want to say, I just didn't trust the water, but that explanation is worse than silence here. You want to say, I didn't want to get sick, but illness is an accusation. Another voice says you worked but seemed unfamiliar with tools. Another notes that your clothing seems foreign. Strange fabric. Odd stitching. Who made it? A woman wonders aloud, why did you arrive alone? Where was your family? Your wagon? Your purpose? You feel heat crawl up your neck, not anger, but the primal fear of being the topic rather than the listener. Historians still argue whether early colonial trials were built to protect communities or to protect conformity, but tonight, the line blurs. You speak carefully, simply, respectfully. You say you are learning the work, that you are grateful for guidance, that you intend to contribute. Your words land in the room like stones, not heavy enough to break anything, not light enough to float. They simply exist, waiting for interpretation. The older man nods slowly. Too slowly. We will watch your progress, he says. And the meeting moves on, but the air around you feels colder, not from weather, but from attention. Afterward, as people leave, their eyes linger on you. Some curious, some cautious, a few kind. One woman gives you a small nod, encouragement or warning, you can't tell. You step outside into the night air. It bites sharper than before. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's the knowledge that eyes will follow more closely tomorrow. As you return to the cabin, the bearded man walks in silence beside you. He finally speaks, not unkindly, not threateningly, but honestly. Be careful, newcomers attract question. You nod. Inside, the fire crackles. Shadows stretch across the walls like long fingers. You lie on your straw bed and rehearse everything you said, everything you didn't say, every facial expression you accidentally made. And through the smoke and silence, one thought echoes. In colonial America, justice isn't blind. It sees everything, including you. The next morning greets you with the sound of footsteps, heavy, intentional, and too synchronized for comfort. When you step outside, the sky is still pale, as if daylight itself isn't fully convinced it should show up. A small group of men stand near the meeting cabin, speaking in low, clipped tones. You don't approach because curiosity may be a natural instinct, but here, curiosity is harmful cardio. Word spreads quickly, drifting through conversations like smoke through rafters. Someone has been accused of causing harm to another's crops. You don't know what harm means in this context. Carelessness, sabotage, an animal wandered too far. But the word accused lands like a stone. 2 men escort the accused. A farmer you've seen once or twice hauling sacks heavier than your self-esteem. His expression is calm, but not confident. Calm like someone who has learned that panic doesn't influence outcomes here. The villagers gather again, not formally summoned, just conditioned by expectation. The air thickens with judgment before any facts are presented. Your anchor fact arrives quietly, like the creak of wood. Colonial justice was heavily influenced by community perception, rumors, and moral reputation. Legal defense was a luxury, not a guarantee. The moderator asks the farmer to explain himself. He claims innocence, voice steady, eyes level. The complainant insists otherwise, presenting broken fencing and trampled plants as evidence. The two argue not loudly, but with the sincerity of people who know words are weapons. Witnesses are called. One saw hoofprints. One heard something in the night. One felt that the accused has been less reliable lately. That last statement carries weight it absolutely shouldn't. You stand still, replaying yesterday's meeting in your mind, like a cautionary trailer for today. The accused attempts to defend himself, but defense here feels more like delaying the inevitable than changing the outcome. The moderator suggests restitution, a payment of crops come harvest time. The settlers nod, not unanimously, but sufficiently. The accused accepts. What choice does he have? Disagreement is not rebellion, technically, but it smells similar. The group disperses, but you remain uneasy. You didn't witness the event, yet you feel as though you witnessed the verdict long before the evidence appeared. Later that day, as you help mend a small wooden gate, you ask cautiously quietly how disputes are usually resolved. The bearded man answers with the simplicity of fact, not opinion. We settle it ourselves. Not court, you ask. He pauses. This is court. He walks away. You stare at the tools in your hands. Hammer, nails, wood, objects you understand, systems you do not. A fringe tidbit bubbles up from an overheard conversation. Some colonies experimented with early jury systems. Others relied on local magistrates, while many used town meetings as makeshift courts mixing civil law, moral law, religious law, and personal vendetta into one stew. The stew metaphor feels fitting and unsettling. As evening approaches, a new tension ripples through the settlement. You hear that someone whispered about someone else's absence at the last gathering. Someone else mentioned hearing raised voices from a nearby cabin late at night. Someone else wondered why the preacher paused mid-sermon last Sunday to glare at the back row. Small things. Nothing on its own. But here, nothing exists on its own. Historians still argue whether social control in colonial towns built strong communities or brittle ones, but from where you're standing, unity begins to resemble surveillance. You're helping gather kindling when a girl runs by, chased by a boy her age. They laugh. It's the first carefree sound you've heard in days. Then the girl trips, wood spilling everywhere. Her mother storms over, scolding sharply not because the girl fell, but because others are watching. In a place where image is survival, even children learn self-censorship before self-expression. As night falls, fatigue settles in your bones, but your mind refuses to follow. You lie awake, replaying the day, the accusation, the witnesses, the verdict. You think about your arrival, the questions about you, the glances that last 1 second too long. A single misunderstanding here could bloom into suspicion. Suspicion could become accusation. Accusation could require proof you don't possess. The fire crackles beside you. Smoke lingers in stacks above the hearth like unwelcome thoughts. You close your eyes, but sleep doesn't accept your invitation yet. You begin to understand. Justice here isn't about fairness. It's about order. And order has a price. One you are not sure you can afford. You wake in the dead hour before dawn to shouting not frantic, but sharp, clipped, and tense enough to slice the quiet. The bearded man steps outside immediately, and you follow because instinct and anxiety have become close friends. A group is gathered near the edge of the settlement, their breath visible in the cold as they argue in harsh whispers. Someone's lantern light catches the unmistakable shape of broken branches and trampled earth. Not livestock prints. Human. Several. Tracks, someone mutters. The forest line, only yards away, feels more like a wall now, a shifting, breathing boundary separating lives, languages, expectations, and mistakes. A woman clutches her shawl tighter. They were close, she says, voice barely above a ghost of sound. No one corrects her. No one needs to. Your official fact requirement steps in here. Contact between colonists and native peoples ranged from trade alliances to violent confrontations, often driven not by malice but by fear, scarcity, and overlapping claims to land and resources. And fear is here thick enough to taste on the cold morning air. A meeting forms quickly. Weapons are checked, not polished checked. A musket here is not symbolism, it's survival, or the belief in survival. Powder is poured, fuses trimmed, blades sheathed but ready. There's no rallying speech, no dramatic declaration, just necessity. You are not asked to go. You are relieved again, and ashamed that you are relieved. The men disappear into the trees, swallowed by branches, frost, and the sound of crunching soil. The settlement waits. Waiting here is work. Animals must be cared for. Water must be hauled. Children assigned circles of space they shouldn't leave. People work while glancing sideways, ears tuned to the forest. You keep busy splitting wood as best as someone with questionable technique can. A boy corrects your grip silently, then returns to his own chores without comment. Even assistance is quiet. Everyone's minds are elsewhere. Then a rumor forms. Not loudly, not clearly, just drifting. Someone heard a farm further south was attacked last winter. Someone else heard it was simply abandoned. Someone else heard both. Rumors here are not stories, they're warnings wearing uncertainty like a coat. A fringe detail fits too well. There were documented cases where a single misunderstanding, stolen livestock, disputed hunting grounds, a mistranslated phrase spiraled into retaliatory violence. Fear multiplies faster than facts. Hours pass. Grey sky becomes paler grey day. You help repair a storage shed door and notice your hands shake more from nerves than cold. Every snap of a twig makes heads turn, not dramatic reactions, just instinctive ones. When the scouting party returns, the news is something between relief and confusion. Tracks found, evidence of camp remnants, no confrontation, no clear message, no clear absence of message. They're close, someone repeats again. The statement isn't news, it's shrug, shaped dread. The community debates next steps. Words you've come to fear, repeat, watch, guard, prepare, warn. Historians still argue whether colonial fear was justified defense or self-fulfilling paranoia, but standing here, surrounded by people who have so little margin for safety, fear feels almost reasonable. Almost. That evening, the tension remains. Even the children are quieter. Games are subdued. Chores are faster. Doors close earlier. During dinner, a bowl of stew that tastes like vegetables, remembering being alive, you accidentally ask a question. Has anything happened here before? It slips out. Everyone pauses. The bearded man finally answers, not ominously, not dramatically, just honestly. Not here. Not yet. The word yet lands like a cold coin dropped into your hand. Night comes early. The kind of early that makes time suspicious. Lanterns glow in windows like breath held behind glass. You lie on your straw, listening to wind push against walls that don't always push back. You think about the forest alive, unknown, watching. You think about the settlement tired, guarded, building itself on ground older than its arrival. You think about fear, not loud fear, but quiet survival fear. The kind that doesn't scream, it calculates. Your eyes close slowly, because keeping them open changes nothing. Sleep doesn't bring peace, it brings pause. Because tomorrow will arrive whether you rest or not. And in colonial America, survival doesn't wait for certainty. It only waits for dawn. Morning arrives with mud. Not snow this time, not frost mud. Thick, sticky, clingy mud that grabs your shoes like it's emotionally attached. The frost melted overnight, and the ground responded by turning into pudding with attitude. Every step forward becomes 2 steps sideways. The air smells like damp earth and livestock, with just a hint of regret. Today, you learn something new. Traveling even a short distance in colonial America is a campaign. Your first historical fact comes into play fast. Roads in many early colonies were barely roads at all, more like widened footpaths or wagon trails that changed with every storm. Cars didn't exist. Wheels broke often, and travel took hours or days instead of minutes. You're given a task, delivering a bundle of dried herbs and messages to a nearby homestead about a mile away. A mile sounds laughable by modern standards. A mile is nothing. A mile is, I'll just walk. A mile is, it's only 2 songs. But this mile is not your mile. The bearded man hands you a small sack, nods firmly, and says, "Back before dusk." Dusk. The word feels heavier than it used to. You start walking, adjusting your balance like a tightrope performer who didn't rehearse. Mud clings to your shoes, adding weight in increments you never asked for. You move slower. Your footsteps make that suction sound like the earth is trying to keep you here, because it knows you won't like what's ahead. The path narrows to something between a trail and an accident waiting to happen. Tree roots stick up like booby traps. Branches snag your sleeves. The wind pushes. The mud pulls. You begin negotiating with gravity on every step. Travel here isn't exercise. It's survival-themed slapstick. You reach a small stream, narrow but running quick from melted frost. There's no bridge, no stepping stones arranged conveniently by Disney woodland creatures. Instead, there's a log, a narrow, uneven, questionably balanced log. You test it with 1 foot. It wobbles. You wobble. You consider your choices. Option A, cross. Option B, live here now. You inch across, arms out, sack clutched, knees bent like a precarious baby deer. Water rushes beneath you, loud enough to make you question how waterproof your shoes are. Answer, not at all. You make it across barely panting like you just outran something dangerous in a movie. You check the sack like it contains your identity. The sky is grey, not threatening rain, just threatening indecision. You walk onward, hearing birds and rustling bushes. Every sound becomes a question. Your pace increases, not from confidence, but the primal understanding that being alone in this landscape comes with disclaimers. Here comes your fringe tidbit. Colonial travelers sometimes carried bells or whistles, not to communicate with humans, but to warn animals, specifically bears, that they were approaching. You wish you had a bell. You wish you had Wi-Fi. You settle for making awkward throat noises. Finally, you spot the homestead, 2 small structures, smoke from a chimney, a figure chopping firewood with the confidence you've never had in your life. You approach carefully, because surprising someone in colonial America is a poor life choice. The man sees you and pauses his swing. "From the settlement?" he asks. You nod, hand the sack over, and deliver the short message you were told to say, praying you remembered all the words, because improvisation here feels like a crime. He offers you water, which you decline politely, a survival instinct disguised as manners. He laughs softly, as if your refusal answers every question he didn't ask. You chat briefly, mostly him talking, you nodding, but he mentions storms coming, plural. He suggests you leave soon. You don't argue. You start back. This time, the mud feels deeper, the wind stronger, the log seems thinner. You cross again, less gracefully, more anxiously. Halfway back, you hear something behind you, twigs, snapping, steady, deliberate. You turn, nothing visible. You walk faster. The sound continues. Not close, not far, just present. Historians still argue whether fear of wilderness shaped colonial culture more than religion or warfare, but right now, wilderness feels like its own kind of theology. You reach the settlement as dusk lowers its dim curtain, and your lungs write formal complaints. People glance at you, checking, not greeting, making sure you returned. Alone. You nod to the bearded man. He nods back, not praise, not relief, just acknowledgement. In colonial terms, that might be the same as a 5-star review. That night, as your shoulders throb and your shoes dry near the fire, you realize travel isn't about distance here, it's about risk calculation. Insects, animals, weather, terrain, time, mistakes. In your world, travel begins with a seatbelt click. Here, it begins with a whispered hope, and ends, if you're lucky, where you intended. You start the morning with a new awareness of your surroundings. Not the immersive, nature-loving kind, but the defensive, please don't let anything attack me kind. Travel, even short travel, reshaped your understanding of distance. Today, though, the concern isn't the mud or the forest or the wind. It's the sound of gunfire. Not loud, continuous blasts like modern movies with endless ammunition. Just a single shot, sharp, distant, unmistakable. Then silence so thick you feel it settle over the settlement, like an invisible frost. Then another shot. Closer this time. People stop mid-motion. A woman carrying firewood freezes. Logs tumble to the ground unnoticed. A boy leading goats pulls them back. Tools lower. Voices hush. Heads turn toward the same direction, as if everyone here has been conditioned to tilt their ears in unison. The bearded man steps out of the cabin, jaw clenched. Without hesitation, he checks his musket, prepares his powder, and meets a group forming near the edge of town. Militia, someone whispers. Militia. A word you've heard in documentaries, in textbooks, in movies, but it feels different when it loads powder. Your first historical fact for this section comes wrapped in gun smoke. Colonial militias were not full-time soldiers, just townspeople trained to fight when necessary, often more familiar with farming tools than firearms. The bearded man sees you watching and gestures sharply. Stay with the children and women. If there's trouble, you get inside. The statement doesn't feel patronizing. It feels like responsibility being redistributed by urgency. The militia moves toward the woods slow, disappears bloom like weeds. Maybe friendly hunters from another settlement. Maybe not friendly at all. Maybe a warning. Maybe coincidence. Maybe a coincidence mistaken for a warning. Historians still argue whether colonial conflicts escalated due to miscommunication or inevitability. Even scholars in warm university offices cannot agree. Out here, miscommunication feels like the more fragile thread. The bearded man returns to you later, brow furrowed. "We'll keep watch tonight," he says. "Just precaution." Precaution. A soft word hiding sharp meaning. Night arrives early, carrying shadows with it. The settlement moves with intention lanterns placed strategically, tools sharpened, livestock secured. There is no panic. Panic is loud. Panic wastes energy. This is something else. Quiet vigilance stitched into routine. A group of men take positions at different points around the settlement. They aren't soldiers, but they hold themselves like people who might need to be. Muskets rest against walls or knees. Flint and powder kept dry. Eyes scan the dark, where tree trunks look like waiting silhouettes. You sit near the bearded man by the fire. He hands you a small knife, not as a weapon of war, but as a tool of last resort. The weight of it is startling. Your hand feels foreign holding it, as though the blade understands responsibility better than you do. "Try not to need it," he mutters. You nod because what else is there to do? The fire cracks. The logs spit embers. The wind carries the scent of pine, smoke, and something colder that doesn't belong to weather. Hours crawl. In the distance, an owl calls long, hollow, haunting. Someone in the watch shifts. Leather creaks, wood groans. Everyone hears everything. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your mind, something from a documentary. Colonial houses were sometimes built close, not for convenience, but defense clustered like cattle, survival by proximity. Tonight, clustered feels correct. At one point, you hear something near the tree-line branch crunching under weight. Not wind, not imagination. Everyone else hears it too. The men grip muskets tighter, trying to appear calm for the sake of those watching from windows. You stare into the darkness until your eyes attempt to sew shapes from shadows. But nothing emerges. Tension lingers, even after the sound fades, remaining like an aftertaste of fear. Because sometimes the threat isn't the enemy, it's the unknown wearing their shape. Eventually, the night thins. The sky lightens from black to navy to reluctant grey. Roosters crow not bravely, just consistently. The forest remains silent, holding its secrets. As dawn arrives, fatigue surfaces, not restful tiredness, but the tiredness you earn by negotiating with fear all night. People stretch stiff limbs and extinguish lanterns, not celebrating, not relieved, just continuing. Breakfast is quiet. The bearded man eats without looking up. The children joke softly, but their glances still drift to the woods. Nothing happened, and everyone is still afraid, because fear isn't always triggered by threats. Sometimes it is triggered by the absence of clarity. In colonial America, conflict doesn't need a battle to change you. The waiting is enough. You'd think that after a night spent listening for footsteps that never arrived and holding onto a knife you hope never to use, the settlement would ease back into its routine with some kind of collective exhale. But no, colonial America doesn't exhale. It braces. Every conversation today has a shadow in it. You hear it in the tone rather than the words. People work faster, speak shorter, glance more often, not because danger is confirmed, but because danger feels probable. And you learn something valuable about humans. Fear doesn't have to be accurate to be effective. You spend the morning repairing tools, sitting outside near the workbench while others mend fences, chop wood, haul water. The bearded man watches the tree line more than he watches his task. Others do too, subtly, as if good posture might discourage the unknown. The tools you work with show their age. Wooden handles splinter from weather and hands. Iron heads rust from rain and labor. You sand, oil, tighten, repeat. Tools are extensions of the body here, and bodies are not treated gently. As you work, a man named Elias, quiet-faced, thoughtful, sits beside you and sharpens a blade slowly, methodically. After a long silence, he asks without looking up, "You used tools before coming here?" You answer honestly, "Not these kinds." He nods once, like that confirms something he already suspected. "Your grip is too loose," he says, guiding your hands, adjusting your fingers as though correcting handwriting. Tools need certainty. They don't like doubt. You try again, firmer, more deliberate. The motion feels less like you're borrowing someone else's body. Elias gives a single, approving nod, high praise by local standards. But then, he says something that lands differently. "They'll come around. If you keep working, keep learning, people notice." It's the closest thing to encouragement you've heard in days. But he isn't finished. "And if you don't," he trails off, returns to sharpening. "People notice that too." Your chest tightens. Because here, fitting in, is survival. Not popularity. Not comfort. Not ego. Survival. During midday meal, the conversation remains cautious. No mention of fear directly, just coded references. "Did you hear anything last night?" "Animals were restless." "Tracks won't vanish on their own." "We should stay alert." It's amazing how many ways a group can say we are scared without ever using the word scared. After the meal, while helping gather firewood near the edge of the settlement, you hear its soft laughter. Not from children at play, but from adults nearby discussing something about your mannerisms, your accent, your unfamiliar way of doing things. They aren't mocking maliciously, but the tone carries an unmistakable message. You are different still. You try to shrug it off. Modern advice echoes in your head. Just be yourself. But in colonial America, yourself is a risk assessment. Someone else approaches Martha, the woman who earlier questioned your clothing. She asks where you learned to speak so proper. You almost laugh, if only she'd heard a group chat on your phone, but you keep the answer vague, referencing far away. She narrows her eyes, not suspiciously, exactly, but curiously, in a way that feels like a social audit. "When you talk," she says, "people listen differently." You can't tell if she means that as a compliment or a concern. Historians still argue whether colonists valued conformity because it protected community or because it suppressed individuality. But here, conformity doesn't look oppressive at first glance. It looks logical, practical, efficient, until you realize logic doesn't make it less claustrophobic. Later, during work near the well, a young man jokes lightly. The new one is learning faster than Peter did. Laughter follows. The tone is friendly. Peter, somewhere nearby, groans at the memory. You chuckle along, relieved until you notice how quickly a joke can become identity here. Names stick, roles stick. The fast learner, the slow one, the outsider, the problem, the accused. You don't want your label to be the wrong one. That night, everyone gathers again, not for a meeting, but for company. The fire in the center crackles, sending sparks into the dark like tiny orange exclamation marks. People share short stories, not elaborate, just moments. Someone tells about the time a raccoon broke into a storehouse. Someone else tells about a storm that dropped hail the size of potatoes, though that might be historical exaggeration. For the first time, you laugh not because you feel safe, but because laughing is easier than discussing fear. You notice something when you laugh. Others soften. When you listen, others open. When you contribute not perfectly but earnestly, eyes move from suspicious to watchful to neutral. Maybe neutrality here is the new version of welcome. As the fire burns low, the settlement doesn't celebrate, doesn't sing, doesn't pretend, but people linger, together, sharing silence the way modern people share playlists. When you head back to your straw bed that night, exhaustion wraps around you like a weighted blanket that someone forgot to make comfortable. You realize something subtle, something important. You are not fitting in yet, but you are no longer entirely outside. In colonial America, acceptance isn't a handshake. It's a gradual change in how people stop looking through you and start looking at you. And that is its own kind of survival. You go to sleep that night thinking for the first time that maybe this place, harsh and exhausting and suspicious as it is, might eventually soften around you, or you around it. Because survival here doesn't come from wishing the world were different. It comes from adjusting until the world stops pushing back quite so hard. But colonial America does not reward optimism. You wake to shouting raw, panicked shouting, not the controlled calls of labor or the terse voices of warning. This is different, urgent, loud enough to rattle your bones awake. You stumble outside with others, and your breath catches, smoke thick, black, rising too fast billows near the livestock sheds. Fire, not contained, not small. People run with buckets, forming a desperate chain from the well to the flames. You join instinctively, passing sloshing water forward, your arms burning almost immediately from the weight. The heat on your face feels like opening an oven while your head is inside it. Someone yells to grab sand. Someone else shouts to free the animals before they panic. But the animals already are panicking. Goats bleat and collide in chaotic fear. Pigs shriek. Chickens scatter like feathery explosions. The smoke blinds, stings, invades. Your heart pounds not metaphorically. You feel your pulse in your fingertips. A burning beam collapses with a thunderous crack. Sparks shoot upward like evil fireworks. The air tastes metallic. Your throat burns. Your eyes water more than the buckets do. The bearded man grabs your shoulder not harshly, urgently. The wind, if it shifts, it'll take the homes. You look around. The wind has never felt like a character before. Now it has the power of law. Everyone works faster. More water, more sand, more fear. Fire in colonial America isn't a disaster, it's a sentence. Here's your historical fact of the section. Colonial towns often burned quickly because houses were wood, insulation was flammable, fire pits were indoors, and water was slow. Entire settlements vanished in a single afternoon. The flames finally weaken. People cough, collapse to knees, cry not out of grief alone but out of exhaustion and the relief of still having something left to lose. But the shed is gone. The food stores inside, smoked meat, dried fish, herbs gone, some livestock gone. A pig limps past you, half burnt, crying a sound that will follow you into dreams. The settlement gathers in grim silence. Whispers become words. Words become blame. Was someone careless? Was the fire smouldering overnight? Was the bucket line too slow? Was the watch distracted? Questions sharpen like blades. Someone mutters the conclusion you feared. We weren't prepared. Another voice adds, colder. Some people still aren't used to the work here. You don't have to guess who that comment is about. The older man, the moderator, speaks to everyone, but his eyes flick briefly your way. You must understand survival requires discipline. One weak link can bring loss for all. Historians still argue whether colonial fear built community strength or community cruelty. But here, you see how quickly fear can turn neighbors into jurors. The day drags forward on emotional splinters. Work resumes because work must. Debris is cleared. Injured animals tended to. Any small salvage collected like war trophies. But whispers continue. You notice fewer glances of neutrality, more of calculation. Your mistakes no longer feel like personal growth. They feel like potential evidence. Evening comes, but nobody gathers socially. Conversations are short, hollow, unfinished. People drift like ghosts between tasks. By lantern's low, trembling light, you sit outside, watching the last smoke dissolve into the night sky. The wind cools your face, but not your mind. This place is relentless, not evil, not malicious, just indifferent. It demands everything, leaves nothing spare, and offers no guarantee. You gave your best, but colonial America doesn't evaluate intent. It measures outcome. And today, outcome leaned the wrong direction. You lie down that night, body drained, mind overloaded, knowing that survival here isn't a story of triumph, it's a story of endurance. Until the moment endurance isn't enough. Because here, even after everything you've adjusted to, learned, accepted, you still might not survive the day. Now, as the fire outside burns low and smoke thins into the night, let your breath ease. Let your mind step back from the weight of this unfamiliar world, the shouting, the suspicion, the cold bite of fear that never fully melted. Imagine the settlement growing quieter, lantern light dimming behind shuttered windows, the clatter of tools settling into stillness. The night air softens, and the echoes of the day fade. Not all at once, but the way embers fade slowly, reluctantly, leaving only gentle warmth behind. Picture the sky above you vast, cloudless now, scattered with stars that seem impossibly bright when there are no streetlights, no headlights, no hum of anything electric. Just the steady, ancient glow of a sky that bore witness to centuries before you and promises centuries after. The wind carries only whispers, now soft ones, moving through tall grass and past resting homes, no longer threats, just sounds of a world settling into sleep. Let your thoughts loosen like knots untying. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the quiet. The fears of the day, the weight of unfamiliar expectations, the uncertainty of belonging, they all feel a little softer at this hour. The colony rests. The earth rests. And so do you. With each slow breath, imagine the world growing calmer, cooler, gentler. Let the sounds fade. Let the worries blur. You have walked far today, in a time not built for comfort, and now the night gives permission to pause, to close your eyes, to drift. May your dreams be lighter than the day behind you. And as always,